So, you want to know if you can learn Japanese by watching anime. Hey everybody, welcome to the Learning Japanese channel. In this video, I'm going to be addressing the coveted holy grail of learning Japanese questions of sorts. Is it possible to learn Japanese from watching anime? And like with almost all the answers that come from me, the response is going to be, it depends. Yes and no. To start off, I do want to point out that if you take this question to certain realms, certain communities where there are a lot of seasoned Japanese speakers who are honestly pretty elitist and kind of just want to prove how much they know about the language as opposed to actually help people learn the language, you're likely to get some pretty disparaging shutdown responses to this question. And while those responses may not be entirely incorrect, they're really demeaning and outright non-constructive. People will compare asking this question to asking something like, can you learn English from watching Tarantino movies with their stylized, profanity-rich dialogue? Which isn't even a good analogy. Anime as a medium is essentially as extensive as all movies combined, not just Tarantino movies. Sure, you got some anime that are as rough or gory as Tarantino movies, but you can't compare some high school rom-com slice of life anime to a Tarantino flick. Heck, it's not even a valid statement amongst just Tarantino's filmography. Reservoir Dogs isn't anywhere near as super stylized as Django Unchained's dialogue. Don't put Tarantino in a box. Or what I mean to say is, basically this is a really innocent question, so don't get disparaged when people kind of just go off on you for asking it. If you like anime and you're interested in learning Japanese, it's perfectly sensible to say, hey, since I watch so much anime, is it possible to learn Japanese from doing so? But to be completely fair, people who will respond to you in this manner aren't completely wrong, which is where the it depends portion of our answer, which is a huge portion of it, comes into play. So what I'm going to do right now is just going to shoot off a bunch of yes/no answers to kind of more specific points of this general question. No, you can't learn just from watching anime unless you're some kind of genius. Yes, you can improve your Japanese by watching anime. No, you should not speak Japanese the same way anime characters do. No, this doesn't mean that you can't learn a lot of other things from anime, such as vocabulary terms or grammar patterns, etc. Yes, you can spend years learning Japanese formally at a college or some other institution and still learn something new from anime, even if it's just a little thing here and there. Yes, there are certain types of anime that are much more suited to learning Japanese from than other ones, specifically genres. So if you're talking about a high school romantic comedy that takes place on a, well, high school campus, that's much more appropriate than some science fiction show that has a lot of technical jargon in it. Yes, anime is cool as hell. And lastly now, but probably the most relevant, no, watching anime is nowhere near the most efficient way to learn Japanese. And so now transitioning off of this last point here, this is where my personal advice comes in. If you intend to start learning Japanese seriously, as in you have a set goal to be able to hold a conversation by this point in time in a few months or something, or you're moving to Japan and you're going to be working there and you need to learn the language as soon as possible, do not put the time and effort into learning Japanese from anime. Put that time and effort into learning from actual more educational resources, and the ability to understand and comprehend and learn from anime will just come naturally along with those studies. This approach to learning Japanese by watching anime that we're going to talk in this video in a little bit should only really apply to the people who love anime, watch a lot of it, and want to turn that enjoyable experience into kind of the seeds for an educational opportunity as well, even if it's just super casually at first. For example, maybe you're in high school right now and you plan to take Japanese classes when you go to college, but you have a few years until that happens, and in those few years you're of course going to be watching a lot of anime because you love anime. So maybe you just want to get a head start and just learn the basics and start learning from anime, then this would apply to you. Or maybe right now you just don't have the time to devote, say, 2 hours of studying kanji every day. Maybe you're too shy to practice your speaking skills with someone online. But what you do is, say, watch an episode of anime every day while you're eating dinner or something. If you add that up, that's roughly 2.25 hours of being exposed to the Japanese language every week. So if you've been a fan of anime for even just a year now, that's approximately 120 hours of being exposed to the Japanese language. So the idea here is to kind of take advantage of that decent amount of exposure to the Japanese language and change you from the point of just hearing it and it just kind of sounding like foreign gibberish to the point where you're at least able to make a bit of sense of every single line of dialogue you hear, and in turn turn that into an opportunity to learn, say, a new word or a new common phrase or a new grammar. And the good news is that the fact of the matter is that if you've watched anime for long enough, or you've watched enough anime, you've done this already, but just to a kind of lower degree. Lots of anime fans will likely know and never forget the meaning of words like kanojo, kokoro, suki, baka, kawaii, senpai, tsundere, bakemono, chikara, daijoubu, gambaru, jigoku, kareshi, mochiron, sasuga, sugoi, tomodachi, etc. Despite the fact that most of these people never even learned hiragana, the kind of introductory character system to the Japanese language, and they don't even know what sounds the Japanese language uses. So why is it that they know those words and they are likely to pretty much never forget what they mean? Well, it's simple. It's because those are basically the most commonly used words in anime, and after hearing them so many times, they become ingrained in your memory. So the approach that we're going to talk about is using the same principle here, basically, except we're just going to take it another level up. And what you want to do is basically introduce yourself to the language, including those things that I just mentioned, the characters that it uses, the sounds that the language uses, and some more of the kind of foundation or the absolute basics or the essentials. So if you want to get into the specifics here, what I'd recommend is spending 1 to 2 weeks just trying to learn Japanese, the introductory stuff, and in that 1 to 2 weeks that would include, first up, hiragana. Hiragana is one of the 3 character systems that the Japanese language uses, next to katakana and kanji. They are the 3 writing systems, but technically they all use the same sounds and pronunciation, so theoretically you could get by with just learning the first one, hiragana, and not learning katakana or kanji. This would apply even more so if you're just learning to speak Japanese at first and aren't too concerned with writing, but of course I would recommend learning all 3 of them eventually. But in any case, if we're just talking about hiragana, that should take you about 1 to 4 days. After that, you learn the basic sentence structure of the Japanese language, which is just slightly different from the structure of sentences in the English language. This would take basically a day, really, or not even a day, like 30 minutes. After that, you should get introduced to the different word types. So we're talking adjectives, nouns, verbs, particles, etc. And so what you want to do is you want to get an idea of how to distinguish these types of words, like say you see a Japanese word or you hear a Japanese word, and then you decipher whether, hey, that's a noun, or that's a verb, or that's an adjective, or that's a particle, etc. And so all that actually covers it for the really absolute basics of the language. So now you might be going, whoa, 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 just 1 to 2 weeks to learn all of that information? Even if you're calling it the absolute basics of the language, there's no way it takes that little time just to learn all of them, right? Well, in response to that, I say, let's see if we can boost your confidence right now by doing a kind of condensed proportional version of that in this video right now to give you an idea of the process. So let's say give me a minute or something and I'll try to introduce you to the utmost introductory information about those topics that I just mentioned. Then we'll jump into an example line from an actual episode of anime and we'll see if we can break it down with just that information. Okay, so I can't teach you hiragana in 30 seconds, but we'll skip that one and we'll go straight to basic sentence structure in Japanese, which is loosely the opposite order of the English language. So in English, we have a sentence like, I ate a hamburger. We'll see that the sentence structure for that is going to be subject, verb, and then object. The subject is I, the verb is ate, and the object is hamburger. When we turn this into Japanese, basically what we're just going to do is we're going to flip the verb and the object in order. So then it's going to be subject, object, then verb. Additionally, in Japanese, we have particles that appear after those respective words to mark them as such. So if we have a subject, we're going to have a particle after the subject, usually wa or ga. This is going to mark the subject as the subject and it appears right after it. The same applies to objects. So if we have a direct object, there's going to be a particle after it, the direct object marker O, to mark it as a direct object. Verbs, however, do not have particles, so we won't be marking those with anything. So basically what we have is subject, subject particle, then object, object particle, then verb. So really it's not too different from the English language. Moving on to word types in Japanese. So for adjectives, we have 2 types of adjectives. We call them e-adjectives and we call them na-adjectives. We call e-adjectives e-adjectives because for the most part they end in the the character E if we're just talking about using the adjective by itself and not to any complex grammatical usages. Na adjectives are different on the other hand. They end in anything and start with anything really, so it's hard to decipher them. But when they're used to describe a noun, the particle na is going to appear right after them and before the noun that they're describing. The next word group is nouns. Nouns are probably the most vast word group because there are so many darn nouns, and we don't really have any guidelines for deciphering what's a noun. They can be anything really, start with any character, end with any character. Now we move on to verbs, which have kind of the most complex guidelines, or the most guidelines, because verbs are the words that most often get conjugated to denote tense or aspect. So something happened in the past tense or the future or in the present, the conjugation will differ. We split up verbs in the Japanese language into two significant groups, the ru verbs and the u verbs, because the ru verbs will end in the character ru, and the u verbs will end in the character, well, u. And this is going to apply to the dictionary form of these verbs, as in kind of the unconjugated form. So in English, this would be verbs when they're just in their regular form. Kick, kill, eat, drink. There's no tense conjugation. There's no ed at the end or anything like that. This makes Japanese a lot simpler than English, because in English, even when verbs are in that form, they can end with pretty much any character. Kill, L, eat, T, drink, K, but in Japanese it's just going to be ru or u. However, verbs aren't always in this dictionary form we're talking about here, so this would be the part that would be hard to explain in a minute, but once you start learning the verb conjugations in Japanese, you'll be able to recognize verbs pretty simply because they'll all end with the same kind of sound at the end. Mas, mashita, ta, nai, nakatta, etc. So once you familiarize yourself with those sounds and the meanings behind them, you'll be able to recognize them as verbs usually. Sometimes they'll be adjectives, for the most part verbs. Then at the very end of sentences, we usually have da or des to end it officially as a copula. So if you hear the word da or des, you don't really have to assign any meaning to it. It just means that the sentence is over. Okay, so that was admittedly a lot of information and pretty hard for myself to convey in a kind of completely new to the Japanese language lens. But if it's any consolation, it was actually more than we needed to do to cover the example that we're about to jump into right now. So for our example line now, we are going to go with a short and simple line from one of my favorite anime series, One Piece. And so our line reads, Luffy wa kaizoku o ni naru otoko da.
Luffy wa kaizoku o ni naru otoko da.
This is what you're going to hear while you're watching the episode of anime. Then presumably you'll be watching this with subtitles, which means you'll get the English translation, which is Luffy is the man who will become the Pirate King. So while we're watching anime, these are the two kind of resources that we'll have. What the Japanese that we can decipher by hearing it by ear, which is of course without needless to say, the reason why you would want to learn Hiragana and what sounds the Japanese language uses, so you would be able to pick that up. Then the second one will be the English translation that is given to you in the subtitles, the text below. So let's use these two repositories of information to analyze this whole line now. And so let's see, how many of these words from the Japanese line of the 7 words here do we know with our current understanding of the Japanese language? Well, if we're following this show, I think it's going to be safe to assume that we know the word Luffy is going to be representative of the character's name. So we're going to be able to know that Luffy, the first word in the sentence, is a noun. Even if we didn't know that though, we see that the word wa appears right after that, and like I said in the introduction to Japanese sentence structure, this is the particle that marks the subject or the topic, and so then we would know that wa is a particle and the word right before it is going to be the subject, which would mean that the subject has to be a noun. So we actually know what the first 2 out of 7 words in the sentence are doing in Japanese. We move on, and this third word, kaizoku o, is going to be a word that we're probably gonna have to mark as I have no idea what the hell this means. That's fine, because right after that we have a word that we have traces of familiarity with, and that is the particle ni, and we know that ni is going to be a particle, which means it's marking something, and particles in Japanese mark the word right before it. So this kaizoku o is going to be a word that is being marked as something with this particle. Moving on, right after the particle ni, we have the word naru, which is going to be a word that we're probably going to mark as well as I don't know what this word means. However, using what I said about verbs just now in my really quick lesson, we know that this could possibly be a verb because verbs will be either ending in ru or u, and this word right here, naru, ends in ru. So it is very possible that this word right here represents the action of the sentence. And if we get to the end of the sentence and there's no other word that we feel could denote an action, then this is probably gonna be it. So let's move on because we only have 2 more words and we're getting pretty close here. And so right after naru, we have the word otoko. This is the last of the 3 words that we're gonna mark as something I don't know. know. It's a new word to me, and I can't really determine what it is. Judging from the sounds or the characters that it's used to spell it, we might be able to assume that's a noun. But that's all we really can do at this point, so let's move on to the last word, which is da, which is what I said earlier is used to just end a sentence. So we don't really have to put any meaning to this word, it's just ending the sentence. So let's review. We know that Ruffy is a noun, it's the name of the character. We know the particle wa is marking him as the topic or the subject of the sentence. We know the word ni right there is a particle that's just marking something. And then we know the word da at the end is just ending the sentence, really. 4 out of 7 words in the sentence in the Japanese sentence that we know, that's not bad at all. But what we're going to do to finalize our understanding of the sentence is actually refer to the English translation now, because that's going to be a really big use. So we said that naru is something that we don't know, but if we don't see any other word to show up that might be a verb or indicate a verb action, we can probably think it's safe to assume that naru is the verb action in the sentence. If that's the case, we can refer to the English translation, find the only verb action in there, and say naru means that verb action. And so, sure enough, in the English translation, we have Luffy is the man who will become the Pirate King. The word become in there is the only explicit verb in that sentence, so we could probably assign that now to naru to mean to become. So naru means to become. Now moving on, we know again from the sentence structure explanation that objects appear before verbs in the Japanese language. So if we know that naru is the verb to become, then whatever appears before naru is going to be the object to that verb. And so remembering the Japanese line now, we had Ruffy wa kaizoku o ni naru otoko da. So what appeared before the word naru was kaizoku o ni. Again, we know that ni is just a particle marking the object, so we don't really have to put any meaning to that, which means the word kaizoku o, which we admitted to not knowing what it meant, is now going to be assigned to the English equivalent positioned word, which is Pirate King. So if we're filling in the blanks here, we have pretty much Luffy is Pirate King become blank. Kind of a messy literal translation, but in this kind of formula here, we see that there's only one blank left and it's at the end. And so then that's going to be the word otoko. And so we just look into the translation again one more time and find what word we haven't found a counterpart to. And that's just going to be the word man, which means that otoko means man. And so then altogether, we see that Ruffy wa kaizoku o ni naru otoko is going to be literally, without changing any of the positioning of the words, Luffy is Pirate King become man. We'll naturalize that into something more in line of the translation that we see in front of us from the subtitles, and that's going to be Luffy is the man who will become Pirate King. And so yeah, if we didn't take any time to learn about Japanese sentence structure, Japanese nouns, Japanese verbs, Japanese adjectives, and particles, we would not have had any means to use the process of elimination and fill in those blanks to learn 3 new words from one line of dialogue. However, we spent a minute or however long it took me to explain those concepts really quickly, and we were able to learn 3 new words. Kaizoku o means Pirate King, naru is the word that means to become, and otoko means man. Admittedly, you're not going to have 100% comprehension with every line of dialogue spoken in the episode. You're not going to know what the full Japanese said. Even if you're not catching the Japanese lines by ear perfectly and say you only heard 2 out of those 7 words, all you were able to grasp was ni naru. Even that can be helpful because it's reaffirming to you that the verb naru is used with the particle ni, and something like that just showing up over and over and over and you hearing it over and over and over can really reaffirm what you've already learned and cement it in your brain and help you retain it for longer. Admittedly, ni naru is probably an overly simplistic example of that, but there are definitely a lot of verbs where it's pretty confusing to remember what particles we use with them, if it's ni or o, etc. Another disclaimer, of course, translations and subtitles aren't always direct translation, so it definitely won't be 100% of the times where you'll have this English line spelled out for you and the position of the words will correspond with the elements of the Japanese language. But again, even if it's not 100% of the time, it's only even as low as 10% of the time, there's still a lot of lines of dialogue in a single episode of anime. The standard episode of anime has somewhere between 250 to 400 lines of dialogue. So even if the chances are low, it's still a decent amount of opportunities per episode. Okay, so on that note, this is where we're going to end our discussion on the sheer yes or no possibility of being able to learn Japanese from anime. In the beginning, of course, we said it depends, yes and no, but hopefully if you were interested in going about it, you can see now that the answer kind of leans more heavily to the yes. So yeah, I hope this video has been educational to you, and if not educational, at least entertaining. If you've decided over the course of this video that you kind of fit fit the description as someone who would like to pursue this approach, we will probably make a follow-up video that focuses more on the actual how-to of learning Japanese from anime. In this video, of course, we did one example just to give you a little exposure to that, but we'll go more in depth into the specifics next time. Okay, so that's going to wrap it up for this video. I hope you learned something, and I hope you enjoyed your time doing so. If you'd like to express that, you can like the video, leave a comment below, or subscribe if you haven't already. If you'd like to support more of these video lessons, or support more of these video lessons being created more often, or support more types of videos, please do consider checking out our Patreon page and consider becoming a patron there. Also included on the screen right now are, of course, a bunch of links on where to find and follow us elsewhere online, including our official website. And lastly, check out our Discord server. We've got a community of hundreds of people learning Japanese just there. So if you're looking for somebody to voice chat with just to practice speaking Japanese, or you have a quick question that needs a quick answer, or if you just want to talk about anime or music or manga or other Japanese things, learn Japanese.becauseofdreams.com/Discord. And with that, see you next time.